Hello again. So thanks for joining me again. This is lecture 6 on how to design as innovators, change makers, change the world. So the issue is that this question was first put to me. I didn't choose this because obviously who chooses this? But this was from Peridor, who you know if you're the students from Bangor, and anyone else who's watching it. Basically, been absolutely incredible. Can't thank him enough for commissioning me to do this lockdown lecture series. But yeah, it's a tough one to say how do people like ourselves create impact in the world. Um, there's not an easy answer. I'm sorry if that means you instantly switch off now and don't watch the rest of this video, but please bear with me as I actually think there's some meaningful things that we can decode together. I think, as always, it's as much me giving some advice, but you also being critical and self aware to know which bits to take from me, which bits to ignore, and which bits to get from someone entirely different. So I would say I've had fun doing this. So thank you, Peridor, for setting me this challenge. It's been quite introspective, but I've tried to make it as universal to everyone who's watching this as well. So fingers crossed. As I said, this is a 2-week sprint, this whole thing, so bear with me. Last time we were discussing picking fights that are meaningful and that are both diplomatic as well as being rebellious as well. So, next up, I wanted to talk about T-shaped creatives. And obviously, I touched on this a little bit, but I kind of wanted to emphasize this is now moving out of the theory into the real world. So, what does it feel like when you actually start to apply things in a visceral way? How is it that you use your creativity to create completely different connections, which may take you to some really, really exciting places? So, bear with me. I think anyone who's looked at my CV knows I've done stuff all over the world with all sorts of different companies. So it's not bragging, but I'm just saying, please believe me, the bit that has allowed me to do all that cool stuff is kind of the T-shaped thing. That's what I'm trying to sell here, or be at least convincing on. So again, this diagram, the point is, these are all the mad experiences. That little dotty box is your narrative. That's what you tell people so that it feels coherent and looks like a T. But when you're doing it, it's going to feel like this. It's going to feel messy and crazy. So just be comfortable that if you want to design a new type of widget for your gran or for your baby sister or whatever, like all of this is legitimate. If you're doing it in a meaningful way that tests you and causes you to grow and stretch, it's always going to be worthwhile. So it's all about meeting people. And so when Harry met Sally, you're going to be too young to get that joke as a film. Never mind. Anyway, the point is, when Harry from design met Sally from finance, different things happened. The point is, and Yuri from legal, and Feng Hao from graphics, and Siddharth the CEO, and Chen from operations, you get the idea. It's more than just designers that you can meet. So, fictitious, in quotes, example, meaning I'm fictionalizing this, but it's thinly veiled to anyone who knows me, knows who I'm referring to. And I just mean it with all due respect, but I'm obviously not going to name names. So, anyway, using the example of our times, the conference call, many are available, and I don't recommend I'll promote any one of them. But let's say that we have all these wonderful people from all sorts of diverse backgrounds, yay to diversity. If we tee them up, as it were, we put all their different T-shaped profiles on there. The thing that's really obvious is that they are by no means symmetrical. They are not consistently deep in one area. They might be very broad in others. They might be kind of biased to one side of thinking. And the point is, I haven't created a sort of taxonomy or a particular scale for this. I'm just creating the point that everyone is different in what T-shaped means. And I really want to land that point for you as well. Jude's T-shape is not the template. Marco Pierre White's T-shape is not the Pierre White from the previous lecture. And so, you might even have sort of distributed parts of your work. I mean, jokingly, when I was working with a startup, we literally had started the project before the lockdown, and then we went into lockdown, and so me and this other guy had, reasonable amount of sheds with a few basic tools and capabilities in, and so we ended up using this phrase of distributed sheds, of the I would finish a certain bit, we'd send it over in a courier to them, to try and keep contact and exposure to a minimum. And the point is, you can have some very unusual working practices these days. And I know it feels like the worst silver lining to try and be promoting right now amidst all the hardship and the heartbreak, but you have to grasp something, otherwise I think we'd just give up. So I hope it's, taken in the good intention that it's meant. But anyway, creating bridges has always been universal, whether you're in the thick of it or not, in organizations for sure. So just to define, so we're all clear on what a bridge is, I'm basically saying if you imagine this little blue square, we can create a bridge from this person, Frank, who's got quite a lot of blue experience. Could be any special, it could be to do with metrology, could be finance, doesn't matter. But the point is, Matthew's got a little bit. He understands a little bit, and actually quite a lot of people around the company have as well. But it's fair to say Frank is really good at this. So he's also aware that Amy, on the other hand, is like super deep. She's not even little bricks. She's like the full T. So this is like the genius in the room. And you always get this in companies, big companies. You get the ability to have like an ultra genius in something. But what sometimes happens is, and this is not to be down on genius, but let's just say it's a bit of a sort of Rain Man thing, of that sometimes they don't always connect to the people who've got a huge difference in skill or knowledge or appreciation than they do. So it can set up some tension. And so what you need are mediators, people who understand a bit more than a bit more than Matthew, but don't have to understand quite as much as Amy. So, Frank is actually quite a powerful bridge here. And of course, what you hope happens is that, not to sort of spoil it, is that actually if Frank can help Matthew understand it a bit better, he might grow a few of those little blue bricks as well, so that it's easier to work with Amy. So I admit I'm spoiling it a little bit here, but this is kind of the game. So even with a lower skill, you can still be a bridge. So I'm sure you appreciate some skills are not taught at uni. They are learned through the daily grind of highs and lows. So forgive me for stating the obvious, but I'm just trying to frame it that you don't have to have like done all this straight out of uni. So bridges can be technical by simplifying things, political, diplomatic, certainly one that I have to learn some days. Creative, usually this isn't difficult for people like us, so consider the other ones, but finding opportunity. Excuse me. And strategic, just actually being more tactical than just here's an opportunity, here's a shiny thing, go chase it. The analogy that's always given, if you've seen the Pixar film Up, there's a dog in it who can be mid-flow and then he hears a squirrel and he's just completely distracted. And that is often a sort of insult to designers to say you're like the dog, you're just squirrel. And I think that's the thing, being more tactical, being more diplomatic, and sometimes just being able to simplify things, that can really help if we're talking to the likely people viewing this who are in the creative fields. So naming just a few. Anyway, bridge example. So let's say we just sort of, again, doesn't matter what these subjects are, but let's say Lois asks you for help and you're Helen in the middle. So, but you're okay, but not great at red. You got a little bit of knowledge, but you've got all these sort of terrific connections with Frank. And if you notice, Frank's actually quite good at red. So you ask him, hey Frank, tell me more about red. I got this thing with Lewis and I need to figure it out. It's difficult. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm winging it. And so Frank usually finds Lewis a little bit difficult, but as you've asked him really nicely, he says, go on then. I'll put you in touch and I'll try and make things work for the best. And so it seems crazy in hindsight that actually these two guys have similar backgrounds, but to be honest, they just didn't see eye to eye. So inadvertently, by the fact that you had good favour with Frank, you've actually helped them do the obvious. And so sometimes it's not always, creating wine from water. It's just, pointing out something that was already there. And without getting too much on my soapbox, I often feel that when companies are innovating, they get tremendously preoccupied with how do we bring ideas from the outside in, when often what's overlooked is the talent you have right under your nose. So sometimes you can spend a lot of time, looking for big new, disruptive innovation, as it's called, and it definitely has its place. Of course it does. But sometimes I found in companies, you actually just have a bit of a genius in a corner who people just don't know how to relate to, and they don't know how to relate to people. So I think that happens more than people would like to admit. So anyway, what I was saying is that ultimately this relationship gets better, and then people wonder, why did it never even happen before? And so what's nice is that you also, Frank's thinking, oh, you're a good guy, I'll also train you up some more on these other colours. And so by the end of the whole thing, you're getting quite good at your blue, your purple, your yellow, but also you've learned some skills by proxy about how to do red. So the impact is you've got new alliances, improved efficiency between Frank and Lewis. You learnt a lot of the on-the-job training, and you've got new projects in new categories. And also, can't sort of this is one of these things that goes over your head when you're younger, but you made your boss look good. If you're not familiar with that, maybe Google around it. It's quite an important thing to learn earlier on, I would say to my younger self. Anywho, so bridge example 2. So here we are. Frank was really impressed with how you handled yourself with Lewis, and so you've still got those good connections, and that's great. But you notice that basically Amy over here, as I mentioned, is a bit of a genius. She struggles with Matthew. And so, as I mentioned earlier on, what's just to break it down in a little more subtlety is that, ultimately you've got this rapport on the orangey coloured stuff with Matthew. And that helps you realise that what you should be really doing is connecting Matthew with Frank. And again, you realise he also is quite into the orange as well. And he's even a bit better at the blue. And of course, being the better at the blue is the key thing, because although you've got 2 bricks, you're not 3 bricks. And so you weren't quite good enough to do this. And now you've inadvertently helped Frank, help Amy and Matthew see eye to eye. So it's all about getting on the same wavelength here. And so and I think one of the things I was sort of making a little bit of a point about is that I was saying almost if you use the colour analogy, green is made from yellow and blue. So we've almost used this to sort of help these things happen. Anyway, I think you get the analogy just fine. And you walk away at the end of the day with you've improved your green skills, and you've also gained this mystery bonus skill of white, whatever that is. So your impact. Following great experience with Frank and Lois, Helen used that rapport with Frank to forge a new connection. Helen being you. It was hard, but it transformed Matthew's work, which was critical for the company. So sometimes you can spend a lot of time in your career thinking, how do I do the critical thing? But as a bridge builder, you might enable another team to do the critical thing, and that can just be incredibly rewarding as well. So a great indirect contribution, I guess is what I'm saying. So looking at the before and the after. So I guess it's kind of obvious to say that, there's new depth in a core area. There's breadth in new areas, as we pointed out here. And also there's sort of breadth in new depth, if that makes sense. So we've almost got essentially multiple little T's beginning to grow here. So consider this layout, and I very deliberately chose this because it's a conference call layout, which you might default to thinking all these people are in the office and are just staying at home because of COVID. But of course, it doesn't mean that this team is all office, And so I was kind of wanting to just use this as a good provocation for not just, always talking COVID, but just any organization. I've been freelancing on and off alongside my main full-time work all my career, but I've now gone fully freelance the past year. And I feel that actually, to be honest, this remote working thing has suited me really well. It's not fun given the economic circumstances, but it also wasn't fun getting a job after the 2008 economic crash either. So it kind of feels like every generation is going to have this, kick in the shins, to put it extremely mildly and understate it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the distance may not necessarily always be all negative. So it might be that you have all these things that are completely different, and that when you look at it, these are actually outside the organization. So the question is really, how do you want to fit into these sorts of systems? Because as a graduate trainee, you might be plugged into this in this organization. And I spoke to a startup literally the other day who's just hired a graduate, even in these circumstances. So really, the news is very grim, but grim news sells more than good news. That didn't make the papers, not to be cynical, but don't just think I will never survive this, because people will. So the co-founder, the freelancer, again, freelancer, as I said, could be me here as Helen outside the organization. So it's really just about, the question is really, what is the future you? So to T or not to T, you could say this is a specialists versus generalists debate. But again, I kind of like to sort of push this IDOU thing and go, what about the T's stuck together, the super generalists? And so the super generalist, that isn't my phrase. I'm stealing that from an incredible mentor, Evan, at Dyson, who not just hired me, but also like really took me from being truly awful. I was turning up late to work just because of lift shares and all sorts of madness. And I remember him, just all those little things, getting me to be more professional, as well as trying to just take my actual design professionalism to an entire another technical level. So he actually used this phrase early on in one of my appraisals to say, you're kind of looking at trying to be a super generalist, and it's going to be pretty hard for you, because ultimately it isn't an easy sell. But he said you have to appreciate it's a long game. So if you keep working at general skills and keep building those skills up, there will come a point where it's a critical mass, and the balance will start to tip, where you're hired not just because of your design skills, you're hired because of many other things as well that you also have valid experience in. So for example, yes, I'm a designer, but it's probably been like 4 years in TV production on and off now. So it's probably fair to say that is, it doesn't really matter what these legs are, but I'm above average experience of how TV shows are made. I don't know how to make all TV shows. I'm not an expert, but I know more than your average designer. So I think the thing is, don't be afraid to what can look like dabbling at the beginning until it becomes another T. And then it's actually really, really powerful. And I've definitely got work off the back of having more than just one T leg. Anyway, geography is not a limit. Now, of course, I should point out that, of course, I've had the fortune of that I've done stuff in the UK, both Scotland and Bristol and London, and that's all great. And I've learned a hell of a lot. But I'd also done stuff in other parts of Europe. I spent a year in Norway. I've done freelance work in Amsterdam and Berlin, Copenhagen. So, and of course, working between the UK and Denmark with Lego. Hong Kong I've mentioned, and also out in California. And then weirdly, even when I was in Norway, we did a design collaboration in Costa Rica and also Cuba. So absolutely crazy. I'd say as well, like NTNU, if you get a chance to do an Erasmus year there, it's not to sound bad, but let's just be real about it. Norwegians are super rich. So there's a saying of, and I can say this because this came from Norwegians, but they said Norwegians go on holiday to save money. And so I kid you not, we worked for a couple of weekends putting together a trade show, basically doing manual labor, and it paid for almost a month being in Costa Rica and Cuba. That is how much the GDP disparity is. So I didn't plan it that way, but I would say also it's interesting to consider when is a really good time to be in a certain place. And it might be that it doesn't always have to be at geography. It might be that the best opportunity as a result of all this stuff to do with COVID is to do something that is in demand. I mean, I was talking to one of my friends who works in social media, and we were just joking about, God, I wish I had shares in yeast right now, because the amount of people making bread at home has gone through the roof. You can't buy yeast online or in shops for love nor money now. And so, all this stuff like sourdough was like kind of cool, kind of hipster, and is now with people all this spare time. And frankly, if you've ever made bread, it really gets a bit of aggression out, because you can like give it to the bread. So I would say, again, it's that thing of like how to think, as your designers, you're trained to think outside the box. What are the opportunities that are going to be skyrocketing now? Again, speaking to other people about how to make face masks. I'm not going to get into this because it's extremely complicated, but obviously that's a growth area. So again, I wanted to say, like, in case you're thinking, oh, thanks, yeah, but I can hardly get on a plane and go to Norway, can I? So I thought I'd talk a little bit about micro world building. And again, bearing in mind, unfortunately, this was put together in 2 weeks. So I didn't have time to get like copyright signed off. But if you Google a chap called Stanley Spencer, who's an artist, very unusual chap, absolutely phenomenal talent in terms of his technical ability and also the sort of the emotional intensity of his paintings. But the thing that is really interesting about his story is that he was religious, and he lived in this tiny tiny little village called Cookham, and it must have been like less than a few hundred inhabitants, and he depicted biblical scenes, and it's kind of hard to describe, you'll just have to Google it, because it's not heretical or insulting in any way. It was very sincere, but he depicted biblical scenes through the lens of what it is in that small village. So, for example, Jesus carrying a cross up the hill. There was this, rather unusual picture of this window cleaner with a ladder that way and a ladder that way in the shape of a cross, walking tiresome, wearily up the hill. And so it's kind of hard to say this is not an insult. This was done with all sincerity and is well regarded in the fine art world. But the point is, he was able to immerse himself so deeply in what was probably less than 1 square mile. And so if you have to focus in on something, you can build extraordinary worlds out of very small geographic spaces. And of course, imagination is boundless. So Lord of the Rings, the gaming industry, online communities, these are not limited by physical constraints. So without sort of sounding, oh, it's no problem and it's easy peasy, just I'm leaving that there as a provocation to say, what worlds can you build? What connections that can you engage with? There's a startup that I was talking to out in, I think it was Copenhagen, that were basically looking at how to play computer games and racing games over the internet, because there's new protocols and new technology that is allowing almost zero latency between you pressing your keyboard and being able to drive a little race car around a track. So absolutely extraordinary. Excuse me. It's called Surrogate TV, if you're wanting to look it up. Absolutely incredible guys. But again, like, if you're into that space, working with them, they're probably just on the cusp of picking up and being something really quite incredible. So it's that interesting intersection of not just all the exciting stuff around technology. The timing could be perfect for them right now. So Surrogate TV. I'm not paid, don't have shares. I just think they're awesome. Anyway, it takes time. Be patient. Be patient with yourself is really what I'm saying in all of this. And also, it is whatever you make it, and it's how you tell the story. So you can be a specialist or a generalist. And I think I'd sort of mentioned that the pros of this is that sought after knowledge, of course, is a premium. You get to charge a lot more if you're a big specialist lawyer in something. We all know this. But the cons are that sometimes all eggs in one basket. And I use lawyers as an interesting thing, is that you might be thinking, oh, lawyers, it's just, they're rich, everything's easy, right? AI and machine learning is one of the biggest threats right now to the legal industry, because all that stuff that you pay a lawyer to basically say, can you just tell me if it's okay, and can you put it in plain English? Can you compare these two documents and see whether there's any contention between them? All of that stuff, you have to pay someone who's, in quotes, smarter than you. Now, a robot can do that bit, and it is aggressively chasing down that thing. Now, again, like the medical profession, doctors don't just press a button and then go, yep, cancer under the knife. Same with, legal systems. They are going to have a human look over the last thing to see if it makes sense. But boy, is it going to take out 90% of the labor, the mental labor that happened up until that point. So I would say, don't always assume that those who are high rolling it in a specialist area are going to high roll it forever. History is littered with people who you assume would just be on the gravy train for the rest of their lives, and then it was disrupted by something. Often technology, this is why people have the obsession with looking at technology. It is a big disruptor, as well as social change. So, generalists, pros, quick to pivot, jump to new things, opportunistic, as we've said. The cons, experience can look vague for many years, as I've said. And I guess to use my friend Evans, my mentor, super generalist, of course, this is great. In that you could almost develop hinting at Einstein here, who knows, a sort of general creativity theorem. It's all very exciting, but ultimately, we all know that one does not lightly apply the word polymath or super generalist. They don't. It's something that is bestowed on you at the end of your career after you've done it for 40 years. So it's this annoying tension of that, a GP can call themselves a general practitioner, but how do you call yourself a general practitioner of multiple creative arts and applications? I actually haven't got an answer to that. If anyone has or sees the emergence of what that new paradigm might look like, please put comments in, as I'm as eager to hear as anyone. But either way, adapting to more things and more stimulus in our lives will probably only be the norm. So these are modes of being, I stress this, and are not labels. So you can go between them, albeit with a little bit of effort. And there are really no rules. I'd say the only thing that you really can't get back is time. But as someone who did a chemistry degree, then did 3 jobs, was absolutely hating life, ended up watching Better by Design by Simon Powell, and then thinking that it's actually less scary to go back to university and take on a second loan than it is to keep doing something whereas I was working 80 hours a week and was in a mess. So, we all hit breakpoint, and sometimes the breakpoint can help. But you only say that in hindsight when it got better, but it hurt. Anyway, points that still might help. Take a critical look at whoever gives you advice. And so I'm massively saying this about me. I'm super biased. I'm weaving my own story. Don't be seduced. Don't be fooled. It's got to be true to you. So we all have our own blind spots and propaganda. So if you haven't used this phrase much, I was sort of late to this in my vocabulary, but polemic, I think, is a really great thing. And indeed, Century of the Self, the documentary, is a polemic. So facts, it's basically a combination of facts, but with an agenda. So there's nothing in Century of the Self that is factually untrue, but just recognize it has an agenda that is very sharply focused on trying to articulate a certain number of points, maybe to the exclusion of some other things. So it's still a distorting thing. So just recognize that, take it with a pinch of salt, all things like this, and make your own choices. So everyone always talks about, success, and I just wanted to put in this as for the record, that harmony, there's T's in life that are around your work, and there's T's in life that are around your personal, the balance. And so, of course, media, Maslow's hierarchy of needs likes to make out as if self-actualization is all about, me being at the pinnacle. If I was going to say anything for the record, I think that we are very seriously on an awakening that the self may not be sustainable for our planet. That if we just train people through higher education, through work, through life, through self-help books, that all pleasure, all success, all attainment is derived from thinking about oneself. It just literally seems an impossible sum to play out over, 6 or 7 billion people we are at the minute, and growing at crazy rates. So I think it does mean that we have to reappraise what those T's are and what those successes are. And it might be that we start looking to health, family, friends, the planet also matter incredibly. So, soapbox over. I guess what I'm saying is also differentiating between creative constraints, fair responsibilities, and real limits. It's really tempting to think that everything is achievable, all walls can be run at and smashed through. But, I was talking to a designer a while ago, and we were just both acknowledging that actually having a young family is a constraint, and that I did get on a plane at a whim's notice when I was young and single. But I don't actually lament that. I don't think, I wish I was doing that now, because I'm absolutely 100% loving being a dad, and being a different type of partner to my partner. as a result of moving into family. I don't think it's actually impinged in any way on my creativity, and I think if anything, it's enhanced it. But anyone looking from the outside might think, oh, is not traveling the world. And I just think at the end of the day, if that's a problem, then it's a problem. But if it's not, it's your thing. So just enjoy it. So spend less time worrying about what other people think and more time what matters to you. And I think what I'm sort of saying is that ultimately, who defines your success is largely up to you. Of course, there's people like your boss or whatever who will define it. I don't mean in the short term, I mean in the long term. What is the game that you're aiming to long term? So cash, fame, money, love, peace, harmony, kindness, wisdom. How much of this is ultimately driven by, let's just be really confront the elephant in the room. A lot of young people, some of that is still driven by your parents. And some of that is going to be good intentioned, of course. Some of it might have flaws. Evidently, a lot of that is based on their generation, not your generation and not the future generation that you're going in towards. So, and I'm sure this is not in any way disrespectful to your tutors or indeed my tutors, but your tutors, again, they want you to define what you think is the bar, what you think is a good project. So, the phrase sort of flying the nest, they want you to. They don't want you to stay, I don't phone up my tutors 10 years later and say, oh, hey there, can I email you my project? Can you tell me whether you think it's good before I do my presentation next week? I have to make a call on whether I think it's good. And of course, that's 10 years out. And of course, you're allowed a transition period. But I'm just saying you're defining your success personally and professionally. And of course, this is a big journey. So I guess what I'm saying is set the bar yourself. That's really the key thing here. So some true stories, just to give a little bit of perspective to all of this. And I'm not at any point saying that you should copy these people. It's just inspiration. So I'm not going to go through it blow by blow, but you can't not talk about Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all these people, but also other people like, Ada Lovelace, less talked about, but fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So sometimes history is just good fun for that sort of thing. Robert Greene's mastery, I would say massively take it with a pinch of salt. It is somewhat polemic as well as Century of the Self, but it's a hell of a good compilation of just really exciting stories. And even if you come away thinking, oh God, I don't know whether I can emulate all these greats and titanic people who've changed our world, the point is, sure, I mean, I shouldn't hold you back. If you do realize the epiphany and you can become the next Steve Jobs or whoever, that's absolutely fine. But it's also completely valid to listen to them and think, wow, I can take a little bit from that and apply it to something completely different and make sense of it to myself. Range is kind of T-shaped on steroids. It's been really interesting for me, but it's a little bit confirmation bias. So I'd be lying if I didn't say that I enjoyed it, because it was just, when the moments when I'm doubting myself, whether super generalism is a stupid idea, this is definitely a book extolling the virtues of that. Creativity Inc., I just think Ed Catmull, one of my heroes. And I think, Michael Rosen, who I hope at the time of this, I know is in ill health, so I hope pulls through. Not just incredibly meaningful to me as a new parent, but I would say actually just the way he deconstructs what it is to be curious about the world around you. I think it's almost deceptively naive and fun, and it's easy to think because it's not a big heavyweight scholarly thing like either of these two books. I think it's absolutely incredible as a book, and of course, wish his family well and hope he's doing okay. Again, I mentioned Better by Design. You can get these on YouTube. There are some dodgy copies out there. And as I said, for me, it was the reason I decided to give design a go, and I've never looked back. So I'm eternally grateful to these two gentlemen, and indeed everyone in their team who obviously continues their work as well. Abstract on Netflix is just really good. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely joyous to watch, but it doesn't spend a lot of time dwelling on the gritty realities. So it's very much like the the beautiful arc of how everything worked out just fine and hunky-dory. So it's kind of talking to people at their careers when they've made it, and most of the sort of the jeopardy is kind of not there. But that's okay. That's not the program that it's set out to be. I obviously put Big Life Fix because, in contrast, that I do feel that the camera was watching us as we massively blundered and screwed up. And obviously it's still, I'm glad that a lot of them had, I'm not going to say perfect endings, but I think it's fair to say they had, endings which were better than where they started. So again, if you haven't heard of Gary Huswit, check him out. Amazing trilogy that he did, and also recently one on Dieter Rams, which is why Dieter Rams isn't in here, because Gary's done it. Yay, and it's fantastic. And then also there's a link here, and there's like tons of other documentaries, so you can just knock yourself out and go crazy. Podcasts, I kind of feel like 99% Invisible. I think pretty much, like, it's fair to say between probably these three, Radiolab, This American Life, and 93, I think they've kind of almost set the template of what good quality podcasting is. So if you don't know them, absolutely have to check it out. I'm not going to go through all these blow by blow, other than just say Debbie Millman, nothing but respect, and a huge inspiration on basically just some of the things I'm thinking of like how to reach out to designers and creatives. So this is hats off. Debbie is just the business. So you got to check her out. Behavioral Psychology, Ogilvy, Behave, and actually interesting to talk about perfection. They have truly some of the, and this isn't a nasty thing, this is just showing that content is king. Their audio setup, their mic setup at times is not even just bad in a sort of perfectionist level, it's truly shambolic. It's absolutely awful. And I think the presenter even acknowledges this, so I'm not being mean. But truly, their content is so good, I suffer that because it's still worth it. Anyway, spoiler. The point is, many of these examples you will find, I think you know it's coming, they're T-shaped people. So, if we go through and we look at these, it's like really to answer Peridot's question as best as I can. Hope it's not too much of a get out, but I truly believe that when you look at design as innovators and change makers, I just can't help but not see this diversity of that they do have deep skill or skills multiple, but huge breadth, huge. And so Charles and Ray Eames, Ada Lovelace, Zaha Hadid, in architecture, Debbie Millman, who I just mentioned in not just podcasting, but also huge career in creative and graphic as well. Seymour and Powell I've mentioned, Dieter Rams I mentioned earlier, but also Ed Catmull, just keep going back to the man. So there we go. Why design, innovate, or make a change? So I honestly think there's no quick answer I can give to this. Sorry, Peridot. But I kind of feel it's this thing of you have to own your why for yourself. And I think keep looking until something resonates with you. And I really thought about that word. I can't think of resonance meaning, look up the sort of the physics definition of it. But I really think it's that thing where you can't always explain it. It's not always logical. When it resonates with you, you will know, and it will make sense. So my own journey to product design engineering, as I said, did chemistry. I almost actually did architecture. I got accepted, but then decided it wasn't for me for various reasons. I'd worked in a butcher's statistics office, horticultural specialist before becoming a product design engineer. So I'm 100% certain that, I can say designers most certainly do stuff. They don't operate only in their heads, and they don't operate only in isolation. Otherwise, I think the term designer is probably fair to move it to artist, because I think they do put stuff out there. They do show and tell a little bit more. So, and I think even when it's rubbish, I think that's one of the graces. I think, just to be fair to artists, it's really scary when they fail. They don't get to put this narrative of, but I was learning. They only do that if you've had a really illustrious career. Whereas actually designers in the early stage, you are allowed to. It's considered good. I mean, and if you don't believe me, go to Silicon Valley and say, "Oh, how many startups have you failed at?" People are almost like, "Oh yeah, I've set up 10 startups and 5 of them crashed and burned. One of them made me bankrupt and lose my house, and they're almost like buzzing with sort of battle stories." I mean, it's not for me, but yeah, it's definitely how you phrase it. So anyway, learning from doing and creative communities. Give some examples. So I've mentioned Instructables a lot in earlier videos. James Dyson Award, as far as I can tell, still going strong. Core 77 Design Awards, Hackster.io. Yesterday I've mentioned as like the best way to get a foot on the ladder, get some global experience. Interested to see how they're going. And in case you aren't aware, are underwritten, I think, by the British Council or affiliated, whatever it is. British Council is like why they're awesome. You've got Kickstarter, Etsy, and of course, things like Kindle publishing, looking at YouTube as a sort of way to obviously I'm doing this as well, and Skillshare. So it doesn't really matter whether these are all for you. It might be that you just want to do some small thing on Etsy and that brings in some income, but then you realize there's a market and you make it into a bigger business. The Kickstarter might fail. You might end up turning to something completely different. You might publish and realize that you should do a Kickstarter. The Dyson Award you might win it. You might get thousands of pounds, which allow you to go do something entirely different. The point is, unless you just keep doing stuff, you just won't have that body of experience to know what to do next. So the caveat, I guess, is a balanced diet. And all this sort of learning, theorizing, idealizing, iterating, imitating, and DIY, I kind of feel like theories and ideals, maybe keep it to about a quarter, imitating and stealing from inspiration and good people to learn from, and then honestly, like 50% just actually getting on and doing it. So whatever it takes to make you cross a deadline, as I said, dates in the diary, fines among friends, whatever you got to do something to push you through it. So again, I've always said, this is my creative diet, find your own. It's imperfect, and I think it's also in flux. It's very changeable, and it will be for some time. But the real question is, what's yours? So in summary, no magic bullets. There's a Sharpie pun there for some people. This is the same advice that I gave at the start, in case you hadn't realized. But I really, truly hope that I've managed to decode some of it and how it worked for other people as well as myself. And in many ways, it's really about how to make it work for you. And so, make it yours. Good luck! So, I felt I haven't actually put any quotes in this. So I thought, what am I doing? This is what, boring old chin strokey guys who are old and past it like me will have to do. So I'm going to give you some quotes now. So take them graciously. Fortune favours the prepared mind. I think this is such a great one in that it's not to say your mind's got to be cluttered, but I think a sort of healthy sprinkling with diverse insights and experience, which aren't just all design. As I said, when I was, working at Lego, I was probably tracking between 10 to 12 different industries simultaneously. Now, I don't mean I had Baking Weekly open with the Financial Times every day religiously. I didn't. But I was honestly looking at very disparate industries, from agriculture to bioscience, of course, to things like play. So you can see, again, it's the T. It's like I'm reading about play and education and all the stuff that matters to Lego. And I'm reading about a ton of other stuff that are in the life of people who also love Lego. So that's not giving anything away. If you look at Andreessen and Horowitz, they're doing exactly the same thing. So often people ask, what's the future? The point is, none of the futurists know. It's just you get better at tuning, almost like they often call it antennas, to sort of like pick up on signals. And the only way you can do that is just by being prepared and just being engrossed in different worlds, different bubbles, different communities. So Brendan Dawes, brendandawes.com, check it out. Huge influence on me and a lovely friend and person who I've known for many years, I think, since I gate crashed an IDO gig, who I've mentioned before. But just absolutely extraordinary talent. And if anyone who was epitomizing putting work out there and experimenting on Instagram and Twitter, he's always putting up stuff that he's just doing mid-process. So if you really want to see what just fearlessness and dedication looks like to something, I can't think of anything any better. And, a really good talk that he gave, which I'm sure is on YouTube somewhere, I'll have to try and put a link, is he said talk minus action equals, what. So it's really just a provocation to say, and I know I'm guilty of it myself as well, and that's why I've always had this slight discomfort with doing a lecture series on this. Is I'm talking about changing the world and I'm not doing it. So you've got to just ultimately deliver on things. So I guess the most useful one that I remember being told by a mentor of mine was, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and this is the hard bit, the wisdom to know the difference. And again, I think the only answer is that it takes a long time to develop that wisdom, and it comes through experiences, and it comes through having a pause in the ability to reflect and understand those experiences, not just running at 100 miles an hour all the time. So I hope that's useful. Thanks so much. I thought next time I'd also do almost like a little, I think this is the close of the series, but a little encore, as I was asked to talk about motivation and finding purposes in life. So I'll do a small talk on that, but really thanks so much for watching. Any questions below, and I believe we'll be having a Q&A, and there will be Zoom links or whatever to follow, so we'll post those. Do follow me on Twitter at Jude_Pullen, and I'll be posting there as well when it goes live. So thanks ever so much. Take care. Bye.